We spent a lot of time, I think, when we were picking a jury to determine who would be the right jurors for a case like this. Obviously, we want people who are going to reserve judgment until the end, but really look at the evidence with a critical eye. Now, what the state has just told you what they believe to be the evidence in this case. But really, at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself if what they're saying is really truth or fiction, fact or fiction. I don't know if some of you recall, but I had asked the question specifically about what you were holding in your hands. And right now, for instance, you're all holding notepads and pens. That would be a fact, right? And in this case, for instance, I had asked before about the idea of, I can just do this, right? Microphone. I'd ask some of you, if that microphone was buried and dug up 30 years from now, would it still be a microphone? The answer is yes. And the reason why that's important is because in this case, what they are telling you, they're representing it to be a fact when it really is fiction. And it's up to you to determine what the facts are in this case. Now, I'm going to give you a timeline here for you to understand just a little bit of how this is going to work, because there's so much evidence in this case that we have to sort of compartmentalize some things. And what I've done is really just sort of focused on the 3 detectives that work this file from beginning to now. First detective you will hear about is Detective Becker. He works the file. He's the original detective on the scene. Detective Long takes over the case for about 15 years or so. And then it ends with Detective Mogg, who presents this to the grand jury in 2023. But why this timeline is relevant is because you have to see the span of time for yourself. 30 years. And ask yourself this, what facts do they have after 30 years? Now, Detective Becker does what every homicide detective does when he arrives on scene. He's assigned to the case. He starts his investigation. At that particular time, though, Tupac Shakur was not dead. He was critically injured. He was at UMC. And it isn't until 6 days later that he passes away. But Detective Becker starts his initial investigation because it's pretty serious. And as a result, he just takes over the investigation. What he will testify to is that Flamingo Cole on a Saturday night in the middle of a fight between Mike Tyson and Bruce Seldon, it was very busy when he arrived. And he arrived at a time where he was able to determine cartridge casings, .40 caliber, that was found at the scene. That's another fact for you. But at some point they're going to learn, he learns that potentially it was a Glock 40 that was the actual firearm that was used in this case. And then when crime scene analysts arrive on scene, they document the evidence. And they document the cars. That will be important, and you'll determine at some point why the cars are documented. And with regard to Detective Becker, what he'll tell you is police officers write reports. Critical. Hugely important. Why? Because at some point in the future, like in this case 30 years later, Detective Becker will not remember details like he would if he had what? His report in front of him. And that's going to be important for you to consider in this case. Now, what Detective Becker does, though, is because of the outcry, the attention, the media focus on this case, he took his file and he secured it in his office under lock and key. Because he was worried about leaks in Metro, leaking information out to the public. Because so many people wanted to know answers to the question as to what happened and who did this to Tupac Shakur. Now, what you're going to find is, when Detective Becker testifies in this case, is that a lot of his reports are now missing. They're gone. Which is Metro's responsibility to hold and to pass on to the next detective, and then finally to the next detective. Now, Detective Becker also did not trust Compton PD. Why is that important in this case? Because there's an individual by the name of Reggie Wright Sr. He was a lieutenant working in Compton in charge of the gangs in Compton in terms of investigations. His son is Reggie Wright Jr. He was the head of security for Death Row Records. The same security that was here in Las Vegas on the 9th of September 7th, 1996. Death Row Records was affiliated with Mob Pyru Blood, And Detectives Ladd and Brennan from Compton answered directly to Reggie Wright Sr. Becker did not trust Compton PD. And the one thing that he really didn't trust is that most of their information came from confidential informants that were not reliable. And he'll tell you that. And because of his intuition, Compton PD was shut down in September of 2000 due to internal corruption. They just evaporated that police department, and the sheriff's department for LA County absorbed the responsibilities for the police department in Compton because of the corruption that was there. Now what facts, right? Just like the pads of paper that you have in your hand and the pens that you have in your hand, what facts can we determine from Detective Becker's efforts? First and foremost, we know that Tupac was shot multiple times. That's a fact. That can be proven. We know that it was with a .40 caliber firearm. That's a fact, due to the cartridge casings. On the corner of Flamingo and Cobalt. That's also a fact. Right? We're on board so far? We know the date, September 7th, 1996. That is a fact. At 11:17 p.m., we know that to be a fact as well. And then finally, that he was in a vehicle during rush of night, and that Tupac died 6 days later. Those are facts that will not be refuted by anybody in this courtroom during the time that we spend together. But here's the one thing. There are no facts to point to Keffe. Not one. And you're going to hear about this over and over and over again. No facts like the microphone in your hand or the pad of paper that you have that you write on. Detective Long takes over the case in 2002, and he has it from 2002 to 2017. He was, interestingly enough, on the gang unit, and at the time of the shooting, he was in gangs, and he had been one of the first to arrive on scene. He will testify and tell you that every time he did something on this file, he wrote a report. Because that's important. That's what you do as a police officer. And he conducted follow-up interviews, and he made some travel to Compton. He will tell you those things. That's his role in all of this. But here's the thing. Detective Long also encountered some challenges in this case. They had to hide the case file with Metro because people were still accessing the file in Metro, and they weren't authorized to do so. So they changed the case number so that people couldn't find the file. In addition to that, what you're going to learn is LAPD reached out to him, called him up and said, hey, Detective Long, we have the gun. And we've tested it, and it matches back to what you're looking for in terms of the weapon that killed Tupac Shakur. Detective Long goes to LAPD, gets the gun, transports it back, gets it tested, and it comes out as not a match. LAPD tells him after, we gave you a fake gun to test you out. This is the level of, I don't know how to put it, that was going on during this time period between Metro, LAPD, and Compton. This is what's happening during this time period. Leads, according to Detective Long, became very scarce and stale, meaning that it was just taking a long time for him to follow up with people. Witnesses became unavailable. Why do you think that is? Because of time. So as a result, memories started failing because of that time. So Detective Long had these challenges. But here's what Detective Long does. He interviews Keffe in 2009. Sits him down, has an interview with Keffe, just like the state said. And guess what happens? Detective Long doesn't even know that Keffe had actually spoken to a task force the year before. How is that possible? Metro is the agency responsible for the investigation of Tupac Shakur's murder, and they don't even know about this. No one in that room in 2008 told Detective Long or Metro what was going on. And you know who was in the room in 2008? You had FBI in the room. You had the DEA in the room. You had LAPD in the room. You had the United States Attorney for the Central District of California in that room. And Detective Long does not know about any of that. What you will also learn is out of all those people in that room, Not one person verifies what Keffe D tells them. That the FBI, the gold standard of investigation in our country, did not go out and follow up on what was said. Now, one of the things the state showed you was a picture of a car and indicated there was 4 individuals in that car. And he tell you that at some point, 3 of those individuals are dead and Keffe's the only one that's remaining. But at the time that he gives his statement to the task force in 2008, there's another individual that's still alive. They never interviewed that individual to verify if that information was true. Why not? Because the FBI just fell asleep? That the LAPD just didn't care? Keffe was never charged for any of what he said during that time period. And it's because they knew he was full of crap. Otherwise they would have. Why wouldn't they? When Detective Long comes back to Las Vegas, he goes and he talks it over with the Clark County District Attorney's Office. And you know what happened then? They didn't charge the case either. In 2009. Ask yourself the reason why that is. It's because they just didn't care about Tupac Shakur or his life? Or is it because they looked into it and realized, we can't verify this information, we don't believe this to be true? Why would the Clark County District Attorney's Office not charge it in 2009? Now, what facts do we get out of Detective Long based upon what he did for those 15 years? We don't have any facts. Outside of statements made, allegedly by Keffe D and other people, we don't have anything to verify any of that information. Not one single thing to corroborate the statements made by that man in 2008 or 2009. Not only by Metro, but by the FBI, by LAPD, by the DEA, by the United States Attorney's Office. No one corroborates any of this. So, 2017 comes along, and an entity called the Center of Investigative Reporting, they file what's called a FOIA request with Metro. And what that means is, FOIA is the Freedom of Information Act. It allows or requires government agencies to give up information if you ask for it. That's the rule. It's to be transparent. And people wanted to know what was going on with the murder files. This is 2017. This is years after any of the statements that were made and anything else. Where's the investigation? What's going on? Well, Metro said, no, we're not going to give it to you. So in 2018, the Center turns around and files a lawsuit against Metro to force them to give them the file, to show them what work had you been doing over, at that particular point, I don't know, what's that, 20 years? That's when Detective Mogg enters the picture. What you will learn is that Detective Mogg basically says, I'm here just to close out the case. He's not here to solve the mystery of who killed Tupac. So with everything you have in front of you, that you're now hearing for the first time in terms of the statements that were made in 2008, 1998, 1990, whatever, Detective Mogg comes along and says, I'm just here to close out the case. That's his role. And what you're going to learn is, Detective Mogg received a copy of what's called the Death Row Chronicles in 2018. It's not a deposition. It's not testimony under oath. It's edited, and it's done for extremist purposes. He receives a copy of it. You know what happens when he receives that copy of the interviews that the state has basically shown you in this case? No charges filed. Why? So, Keffe writes a book, allegedly. Right? Allegedly, he writes this book called Country Free Legend in 2019. You know what happened with the book? Right? Even he confesses to it. What you find is, no charges filed. What is going on? District Attorney's Office doesn't want to charge the case. No charges filed when the interview happens. No charges are filed when the book is written. What is going on? 5 years goes by. And nothing is going on with the case. But Detective Mogg says he's closing it out. Detective Mogg turns around and applies for what's called a search warrant. Now, what a search warrant is that in July of 2023, around that time period, a search warrant requires a police officer to get permission from a judge to basically violate the sanctity and privacy of your home. Right? There's got to be legal reasons for it. He's got to go through that process, and he's got to ask permission from a judge in order for him to get that. And what he does in that search warrant application is he assures the judge, hey, what we are looking for is in the home. The thing that's going to help us solve this crime, who killed Tupac, is in the home. And he signs an affidavit, and that's important. I want you to remember this. He signs an affidavit attesting to what he's saying to this judge to be true and correct. What he says is, I think we have evidence in Keffe D's home that will solve the murder of Tupac. So up until this point, they've got all these statements, they can't be corroborated. So now they're saying, we have evidence in this home that we think probably is in the home. And as a result, we're going to find this evidence. It's going to help us solve this case. What I'm going to tell you right now is they don't find it. And in the meantime, Detective Mogg retires. He now becomes Mr. Mogg. And Mr. Mogg goes to the grand jury. And in the grand jury, it's a secret proceeding. We're not there, but the defense, isn't sitting like we are here. It's just the prosecutors. There's a panel of people called the grand jurors, and you have people come up and they testify under oath. And there's really no way for the defense to challenge any of it because it's done in secret. We don't really know about it. But in this particular case, Mr. Mogg is sworn to testify truthfully. And you know what Mr. Mogg does? He just reads pages of the book into the record. He doesn't do any more in terms of an investigation than read pages of a book into the record. He never documents in any of his efforts any verification of the book before he reads it into the record. He walks up, gets on the stand, and reads the book as if it's the gospel truth. And that's what he does. He treats that book like it's fact. Now, what you're going to find out about Mr. Mogg is that he never wrote a report. So when he took over the case in 2017, all the way up until when he retired in 2023 and was in front of the grand jury, he never wrote a report. Not one time. Not like Detective Becker, and not like Detective Long, and not like any other police officer who does their job. This man never writes a report. In fact, what happens is he transitions, right? He's a Metro detective, he retires, and then he gets a job working as an independent contractor for the district attorney's office as an investigator. And as an investigator, he doesn't have any police power. He continues to work as a lead detective on this case. Even though the procedure is you hand your file and your officer's report to the next detective in line. That's how this works. But he keeps the file for himself and he starts billing against the file after he retires as a detective with Metro. Because now he's an independent contractor. That's important to know. Why is that important? Because what the evidence is going to show you is that he backloaded his work. And when he finally writes a report, it's not an officer's report, it's an investigative report that spans from 2018 to current, and we just received it about 5 weeks ago. The importance of capturing everything you do, the accuracy that you would need to be able to be in court on a murder case, not some type of college paper that you forgot to do and then the last second just put something together and, get it out the door. Mr. Mogg does not do any of that. That's going to be important later for you to consider. Because according to that report that he submitted 5 weeks ago or so, he never verified the book. According to that report, he never investigated any of the alternate theories that were out there, and you're going to hear about those alternate theories. There are people who have developed over time answers to the question, who did this and why. He never looked into any of it. Which I think, at the end of the day, don't you want to see what's out there to help you with your investigation? And according to his report, he did more on the case after he became an investigator than he did before when he was a detective. What I'm going to tell you right now is what you're going to find when you listen to all the evidence, that his work was biased, sloppy, and incomplete. Those are the three things you're going to determine for Mr. Mogg. Now, because of the fact that in terms of the evidence itself, he doesn't have much, the state's going to lean pretty heavily on their witnesses. And I'm going to give you a sampling of the type of people you're going to run across in this trial based upon their witness list in this case. First person is this guy named Reggie Wright Jr. He's the security company for Death Row Records. And what he is a felon. Second of all, you're also going to find that he's a former Compton police officer. He worked for Compton PD for about 5 years, and apparently he got disabled. At some point, he becomes a felon. You're going to learn about that. And his father, like I said before earlier, Reggie Wright Sr. was the head of the Compton PD gang unit. What you're also going to learn about Reggie is that, once again, he was supposed to be protecting Suge Knight. Where was he the night of the shooting? In addition to that, he orders his security team to not carry firearms the night of the shooting, before the shooting took place. What you're also going to learn is, he wasn't even around when the shooting occurred. So the principal, meaning the person he should have been protecting the most, would have been Suge Knight, the head of Death Row Records. This man was nowhere to be found. He was sitting at a club called 662 down the street, waiting for Suge to show up, while he left his people that were working for him unarmed in the vehicles behind Suge Knight. And when push comes to shove, he orders his people to lie to the police during their investigation. That's going to be called by them. That guy's going to be called by them. In addition to that, when everything was said and done, Suge Knight went to prison because he was not supposed to be in a fight in Las Vegas. He violates his release. Guess who takes over Death Row Records? Reggie Wright Jr. Now, the state is also going to bring in other people with unreliable positions, including criminal histories, financial motivations, and inconsistent statements. That are the people and the quality of the evidence that you're going to listen to in this case. Just to give you another example, there's going to be an individual by the name of Devonta Dirt Rockley. Who is he? He's been a paid informant for years. You're going to hear that they have paid him to be an informant. He will, of course, say whatever he needs to say to avoid his own criminal actions, but his testimony will be inconsistent. And that's what you have to really rely on. Is what exactly is he going to say, and can you even believe it? In addition to that, you're also going to learn about a disgraced LAPD detective by the name of Greg Kading. The state told you about him. He wrote a book. He benefited off of what was happening with regards to Keffe. Now, Greg Kading, he stole the file. What you're going to learn is he actually stole the file. He took the Tupac and the Biggie case files and walked out the door. This is an LAPD detective that they are using, or one of the people that they're going to be focusing on to establish their case. He writes the book, and then he holds himself out as the person who solves the murder. That's Greg Kading. That's the LAPD detective. Now, what you're also going to learn is Greg Kading, when he was a detective with LAPD, was basically caught manipulating witnesses. And because he was caught manipulating witnesses, it led to cases being overturned as a result. There was a court finding on this issue. A judge determined that. And there we go. That's Greg Kading. That's a witness in this case from that. Now, your challenges, right? I mean, gosh, we're sitting here, there's cameras in the room. I mean, there's things going on. But it's really time. Like, how do you, as jurors, try to figure out time on this case? There's been so much time. Delays. By who, though? And there's corruption. How do you look at your information that you're receiving with anything more than just like skepticism. Like you're going to look at this stuff and be like, well, I mean, you have a motive to lie. You have a motive to tell or deceive. And it's because at the end of the day, there's not actual facts. When you get past all the talk and me talking, just look at the actual facts. What facts do you have to support any of what Keffe D said on any of his interviews or in the book? When you look at this relevant timeline again, and you see the length of time, ask yourself, what facts do they have to even put Keffe D in a car in Las Vegas on September 7th, 1996? What facts? When you look at the video that happened at the MGM, look for them. Try to find them in there. Try to find any of the other individuals. Remember, he said there's 3 individuals in the car with him and Orlando Anderson. Orlando's in the video because he's getting beat up. Find any of those other individuals on the videos of the MGM. Look for evidence that shows that Keffe D was even in Las Vegas on the night of the fight. Receipts, credit cards, a picture of him standing next to somebody else, maybe watching the fight from another casino. Something. Give me something. In the book, you're going to learn that Keffe says that he was at the fight. He was sitting on the second row. He was sitting with all the celebrities, and he's dressed in his finest gear. There's not one iota of proof that he was ever at that fight. But you know who does show an iota of proof that he was at the fight? Suge Knight. Suge Knight was raided, and at some point, there is a ticket stub to that fight, the Tyson versus Selden fight with Suge Knight's possession. Because he went to the fight. And you would think, a fight like this, you want to show everyone that you were at the fight. There's no evidence at all that man was even at the fight. When we take fact versus fiction, really at the end of the day, what you're going to hear from witnesses that will testify to this is that Keffe D was known to do this. That's the testimony you're going to hear in this case. That's what you're going to hear about that man right there. And so you have to ask yourself the question. If I just say things, is that going to end up being one of those things where I'm going to be hemmed up for a murder if I just keep repeating a fiction? If I keep repeating that? The answer is no. You have to corroborate everything I say in order for it to be true. Otherwise, it's just that. Or fiction. And at the end of all the time we spend together, what you're going to find is that the state cannot prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt the claim that Keffe had anything to do with a first-degree murder with use of deadly weapon. There's no facts to that matter. Thank you.